The thing has been hit. We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by Mr. Tyler Goldstein.
Good to be here.
All right. So, we were just talking a little bit beforehand about what's going on, and just as I was reviewing your work on sentient singularity theory, just the first thing that comes to mind is something something category theory. And I'm just like, okay, because I'll see a lot of things from like the Institute for Advanced Study, this and that, and they'll go up to the blackboard. And don't get me wrong, I'm seeing these Lagranges and Hamiltonians and everything written out, and there's a lot of beautiful mathematics there. Do I understand what it means? No. Could I go through and just start to decipher individual parts? Okay, we're talking about conservation of angular momentum. Okay, we've got some energy in there. There's a mass energy equivalence and everything. Okay, so I can start to get a little bit of an idea of what's going on there. Um, but as far as more of a broad, you put in the terms of a theory of everyone. So it sounds
Mhm.
like that's something that's different than just a fundamental theory of physics, as Professor Wolfram may say. You're looking to connect basically just us as humans within this universe of stuff and things. So
Yep.
what's going on? What got you on this path? I know you've shared it before, but give us the elevator pitch, my man.
Yeah. Years ago, I had kind of a an existential crisis, I guess, where I realized that human wisdom was decreasing, and um, but human technological abilities were increasing, and this was not a trend that could continue. It seemed, and uh, it just I started to think that it looked like we were doomed, basically. Not necessarily like everybody's going to die, who knows exactly the specifics of how it plays out, but that we would reach a point where we would no longer be able to go forward, is what I realized. And that we needed some kind of thing that could change the game. I started thinking about AI, and I heard Elon Musk once mention that the ideal was for AGI to probably value maximizing human freedom of action, and I was interested to see if would that be an inevitable thing that it came to, or would it have some other inevitable conclusions that it would come to about the world, because you can't program in values into something that it can actually think for itself. And so it I decided I wanted to try and figure out what would its inevitable uh, goals and values be, and I ended up looking into trying to map the process of thinking and the mind, just by kind of self-examining my own thinking process from a very very first principles type of approach. I wasn't doing research much into other people's work. I kind of wanted to see what I could construct on my own, and I ended up making models of um, of basically, like you said, categorization and organization of information that our minds do in order to interpret the world. And then I noticed that some of those patterns were lining up with patterns in the standard model, and other you know aspects of physics that seem to be observed. And I kind of just took it from there, and then realized that no, these patterns are not just in physics, they are in everything that we observe. And that makes sense because it's our minds are creating the pattern as we interpret the information that we are taking in our world, even colors and elementary particles and mathematics, and all kinds of different aspects of our areas of study. And then I also had basically come to the conclusion that it seemed inevitable that not only were we a mind that is interpreting information by categorizing it and organizing that information into a hierarchy, but according to a specific pattern. But we are also, it seems to be, at least according to my work, inevitable that we are inside a mind itself, and that existence itself is a self-aware being, a singularity of sentience, essentially. And uh, just through the logical inevitabilities of information, it seems. So that's kind of what got me here. And originally, I did not want to work on my own theory or anything like that, but I looked around at the world of, uh, I guess where physics is going. It seems with Donald Hoffman's work and Stephen Wolfram's work, and even Eric Weinstein's work, and Chris Langan, and all these other people, Clea Irwin, who are working on their own approaches to kind of more fundamental theories. I don't know if I would call them all fundamental, but they're more fundamental for sure. They might be fundamental, but that's another discussion. But I just realized that they were all very similar in a lot of the overarching philosophical implications of them, and why wasn't any of them sticking out? And I thought, okay, none of them have a name that is describing of the essential overarching nature of existence, even within, that is implied within their model. So I came up with sentient singularity theory.
Cool. Well, that's one of the things that I took away from you, because you had mentioned that a name should really be essentially a prime descriptor of whatever it is. And
Yep.
that's given me a wee bit of an existential crisis, because now it's like I listen to you, I listen to Professor Wolfram, and it's like Stephen Wolfram spent like the past 35 years trying to come up with names and stuff like that in that form of a categorification, if you would, there. And I believe that's very important there. And I see you there. Thank you for joining Uncompetitive, as well as Vlad. We see you guys there, and everyone in the future that may temporarily be joining us as well. We have Tyler Goldstein here, and we're going over a little bit of the theory of everyone. It was super honorable mention from Mr. Kurt Jai Mungle from the Theories of Everything channel's Pace 1 contest. And no, I remember in your video, you were just basically breaking it down. What should we actually be looking for? Because people use that term, and like many things within humanity, very often we use words to mean different things. We may be
Yep.
utilizing it, we think the same way, but I think that decoherence, or perhaps some of the noise in whatever the memetics we're trying to communicate there, get a bit foggy, if you would, there. Because
Mhm.
people say theory of everything. It's like, well, my base assumption is, oh, we're talking about everything, right? But then people will use that within the greater physics community, but they're only talking about, well, we're talking about unification of quantum mechanics and general relativity. It's like, is that everything? I remember, was it Professor Don from was it Quanta? It's the Quanta channel? No, the Fermilab channel.
Mhm.
Basically, he says, well, physics is everything. Okay, is that actually everything, or are we just describing the things to the best of our measurements and interpolation at this time? Because it's like, okay, we hear that, but it's like physics means physical. Is a
Yeah.
thought physical? Is it separate? I don't know.
We're getting to a point where the line there, I don't want to call it blurry, but um, it it's not solid. And it's interesting to see that conversation happen, because I think we did see this movement happen. We have for decades, but especially there seems to be an explosion of theories of everything, that as people call them, in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. And that, I don't think that's a coincidence. There's kind of has to do with where we're at. But um, it's it's interesting because we have not yet described what a theory of everything really should be. And I've heard Eric Weinstein say something similar to that. Um, I think that he's right, that we need to focus on first figuring out what is it that we're looking for. And in my video, that was part of the Pace One context, I basically argued that a fundamental theory is not just a theory of physics, even though a fundamental theory is a theory of physics, but it's also a theory of biology. It's also a theory of chemistry. It's also a theory of language and linguistics and economics and all kinds of other morality. But what it is it must be inevitably a theory that contextualizes all other fields essentially. It is the theory that explains physics. It is the theory that explains mathematics. It's not a mathematical theory. It's it's more fundamental than even that, which most that's hard for I think a lot of people to even think about is what's more fundamental than mathematics. But uh, you can start thinking about where quantities even come from.
It's a that's a very deep thing because at that point it sounds like you're looking for the truth, and that's truth with a capital T. And what is that? I don't know.
Who is that?
It's hey,
They,
I see what you did there, sir. I see what you.
they,
I'm not gonna say I disagree with you. Full disclosure, I'm totally biased. I am totally biased on that. So I think we should put our biases forward and everything, and let
that's
the
fine.
science play out because that's basically what science is, in my opinion, is the search for truth.
Yeah,
I've heard it's
I
out
would
there.
agree. Yeah,
So
I would agree that that is what it should be. And uh, yeah, so I mean, I'm not gonna shy away from it. My theory is that it states that existence is a singularity of sentience, which is you are a singularity of sentience, and I am a singularity of sentience, and that existence itself would be this as well, and that it is creating additional sentient singularities within itself according to a specific pattern, and that that pattern is responsible for all the other patterns that we see. Even why are there four dimensions of space time? That kind of stuff like that.
that's it's very interesting you say that because that almost ingrains a form of an ontology, if you would. It's like, all right, what is our realm of persistence, perhaps colloquially referred to as universe, so to speak? What is it attempting to maximize for? Because we have different theories of it's like, oh, natural selection. We want to maximize for the fitness and the reproduction of offspring. I hear that said. I'm like, okay, I guess that kind of makes sense to a lot of folks. But it's like, what is our actual physical existence as we know it attempting to maximize for? And that seems like a pretty cool category to me.
It seems
So
like a very good question.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean,
it's
I have ideas about it. So
yeah, no, and that's the thing. It's we should have the ability, especially now with the technology that we have, the ability to investigate things, to be able to connect with one another, having tools like the internet, or just even this StreamYard's browser-based thing here, this YouTube, the computers, the chipsets and everything, the broadband, as well as other tools like Wolfram Alpha and just modeling software and everything. It's like we've got tools that, but you go back like, I don't know, like hypothetically, if you had somebody like Socrates or Plato, some of the ancient Greeks, Chinese philosophers, whoever it may be, if you could get them up to speed, you gave Newton or freaking Einstein access to Wolfram Alpha. It's like, what could be accomplished? Because not only do we have the tool set, but we now have more or less the sum total of human knowledge, mostly available for free. And I
yeah,
think that's pretty cool.
yeah,
So
it is. It's just a matter of navigating it.
that's well, there's a lot to navigate. So we
Yeah,
have Tyler, a link to Tyler's website and his YouTube channel and the doobly doo below there. But a lot of folks, you were saying the other day, they'll see you post these pictures and they're very beautiful pictures. Do I necessarily know what they all mean? No, but as I actually start to look into them and actually see, I'm like, okay, I'm like, all right, you got basically quarks, quark force points. You have what is it? Hadrons, atoms, molecules, cells, organism, family, gas, technology. I'm like, no, there seems to be a hierarchy going on there, and you seem to be mapping it on to other stuff as well. Also, we have the assembly of information and energy. So it's like, all right, we have more of the physical hadronic type things, basically matter as we more or less know it. And that's what it appears to me I see over here. And then we have the assembly of information for and energy itself, basically how it's going to take the form. So again, you have the list of the assembly of quarks, hadrons, the assembly of atoms, molecules, and basically you're going up. So basically, it seems like you're kind of splitting it up and having it come together as basically you have the the stuff itself over here, and then the things and or the informational action upon which they are defined. Is that fair or am
Yeah,
I off?
it's what you're seeing is it's a um, a hierarchy of assembly structures that are headed by singular beings. Is what my theory implies, that are composed of assemblies of beings, and so a hadron, you can map the colors there, and um, I don't think that even the colors that we see in this are a coincidence. And but I mean, this I didn't try to make anything beautiful here. It just ended up being that way, which it was just, that I think that's amazing. But you can see red on the right side is a hadron, which is an assembly of quarks, where you can see on the red on the left. Or an atom is an assembly of hadrons. A molecule is an assembly of atoms. You can go on. An organism is an assembly of cells. And so we are a singular being. You are a singular being. You are an organism, and you are also an assembly of cells, which are in and of themselves individually singular beings. And so this is kind of the uh, holonic periodicity of being. It's the hierarchy of being, essentially.
That's pretty neat. And I see you there, Callie. Thank you for joining, Callie. And yes, Upcycle is apparently endorsing this crossover. Thank you for joining, my friend. And Uncompetitive is saying that for me, a toe is a parameterless root of all other theories. And I don't want to even assume four. I believe that's referring to dimensions there. I mean that's a pretty cool thing, and it's just if you have the ability to model things, and like Tyler was saying, that sometimes these things seem to line up. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe there is some deeper meaning. Because just even looking at this, I remember just once for pardon my French, my apologies to the French, but for shits and giggles, so to speak, uh, I just took like the fine structure constant off like Wolfram Alpha or something. And I'm like, all right, so what's the size of the observable universe? All right, like 10 to the 26 mile, and you just keep on multiplying. I'm like, okay, this seems to be about the parameterization of like some of the largest superclusters. Go down. This seems to be the parameterization of galaxies. All right, this seems to be the parameters of solar systems, and I'm just going through. I'm like, that's very odd. It's
Mm-hmm.
really cool, but I'm starting to see things because these are different magnitudes. We actually have like pretty cool measurements using SI of these different magnitudes as well, but just as a category in and of themselves, this is something that we've come up with a lot of these categories ourselves over the past hundreds and thousands of years. Um, it's just really neat to see them lined up in this way. And this is just one of the first diagrams here. So how did you start to get from your actually before we get to that oh where was it da, da, da. But oh, I just want to get the upcycles. So is the assembly of assemblies
Mm-hmm.
the whole of that gestalt? Your thoughts?
Basically, it is. But uh, that's it, of fundamental assemblies. There's different types of assemblies that you could mention, and but some of them are, I would call them fundamental, and other ones are not. So you could say, I don't know, you're an assembly of organs. That's true, but that's not a fundamental assembly, because it's not an assembly of being, a heart and a lung, and etc. These are not beings in and of themselves. According to my work, it does not seem to be. So um, I was trying to map the fundamental assemblies, not the emergent assemblies that we can also observe. So it just there. I just wanted to highlight that distinction there. It is different, because
Mm-hmm.
people will say things like, "Well, why not?" Um, organs, why not use heart and lungs and stuff like that instead of just cells, and why not use galaxies and solar systems and stuff like that, instead of um, going according to uh, the hierarchy that I have here. And it's a little bit tough because I think that, for one, we are in this process that is in in this model right now. So we have not gone through this entire process yet. Some of this is yet to come, and so we are around that family area kind of right now. And so we are not yet at the point where technology represents a singular being, and we're not even at the point yet where I use the word caste, but I don't think that that's the best word because it's attached to so many preconceived notions. But there's something, I don't think that there is a word actually in the English language
Hmm.
that really describes what I wanted to describe there. So that was a difficult.
Now, was that also like the corporation that I think you had used at one point, or?
So base I use the corporation as an example of what I call a pseudo singularity. So my theory seems to predict or imply the existence of what I call a pseudo singularity. So there's sentient singularities and pseudo singularities. A pseudo singularity is like a corporation. It appears uh, to be this unified entity. It seems to process information, but it's actually just purely reactive, and it's not actually a unified being with its own experience. It's not sentient, and I my work seems to imply that there are organisms that we call organisms that are also this, and this pattern is probably found on every single scale of that periodicity that you saw.
Mhm.
So maybe some molecules would be pseudo singularities, some would be sentient singularities, according to the type of bonds that they have or something. That's something I'm still working on, but it's a little bit easier probably to see in multicellular organisms where certain things that we call organisms, like a lot of plants, probably most plants, maybe not all, but probably most of them, would be pseudo singularities. They're the equivalent of a cellular corporation instead of being like you and me, where you can clip part of them and that just grows a new one. You can cut part of Coca-Cola off and make Pepsi or something like that. But uh, there are also even some animals that are like this, like planaria worms, which are used by you know Michael Levin in his work a lot. And you can chop them into like 100 pieces, and each one of them will grow a new planaria worm. That to me implies that this is not an assembly structure that is unified into a single sentient being, even though it looks like it is, it acts like it is a lot. It might not be, and there's work to be done on that, I think. But
As much as I must discourage the cutting of worms, because I totally did that when I was a kid. I was a brutal, horrific child, man.
I
Oh, the
did it.
murder that I committed, it was terrible.
Yep. To
Um,
be a child who is male is to kill animals sometimes. But
yeah,
I'm an animal
yeah,
lover,
yeah. It,
like you. I remember finding earthworms and cutting them in half, thinking that they would turn into two, and then they did not, and I felt horrible about it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But gaining wisdom, hopefully over the years,
Yes.
included now. Um, that's very interesting. And I also like the fact that you say it may. You're not saying this is the way it is, because, at least with the internet, I mean, nobody would ever express their opinion as fact on the internet.
Yeah, of course.
Um, it is refreshing when folks say it's like, you know what, this might be the case. This is a very interesting thing, and that's what you've been presenting, and that's why I'm like, all right, I'm detecting honesty here. I'm like, that's a good thing. It's like all right, you could just do just like all the very flashy little things, do this, do that. And don't get me wrong, I love flashy little things. Those tend to be the things that do better on my channel and everything. That's fine. But also the long form, just dissecting and analysis, just getting those ideas and putting it, discussing it if it's out there. Even if it doesn't get as many views as some other things, it's one of the things that I've noticed is that the people that do care, the information is out there.
Mm.
And generally on the rules of the internet, rule two of the internet is forever. Um, so if we actually have the ideas out there, I tend to think that would resonate, that if there is truth to those ideas, if they do hold a certain power, if you would, that can help resonate.
Yeah.
I'm going to start to wave my hands here because I do think that helps with the moving of society forward, because it seems very interesting that over periods of history, whether it was it, I think Newton and Leibniz, right around the same time, they're both inventing calculus. That seems like an interesting. And then other ideas seem to come up at the same time. And
Mm.
then was it like this past week, you see something that's posted on. It's like, oh, it looks like we create a room temperature ambient pressure superconductor. Which, if true, that's a game changer. And then within about a week, I'm seeing other articles out of like MIT uh, uh, folks over there working, creating like what appear to be near superconducting switches and stuff like that. I'm like, well, it seems like a lot of the stuff is happening at the same time. Is it hand waviness, or is it more like we've established that foundation of knowledge of humanity, and now we're starting to really uncover its secrets to maybe help us level up? So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
now
It's
some of these,
interesting to see that kind of stuff. That syncing up of progress that happens. It's definitely a phenomenon.
hey Lucy, hey, thank you for joining us. But yeah, no, this is some very detailed stuff here, as well as, oh, hey, Fractal Automata, thank you for joining. But what I found very interesting, and I'm hoping maybe you can give us some of the detail of your thought process behind this, is we have this visual over here. And
Mm-hmm.
what I seem to be looking at over here is when I zoom in, I personally like this because the initial uh, existent condition, infinite oneness. So one equals zero, which equals infinity. And I feel like that should break my brain, but somehow I seem like accustomed to this at this point. Maybe
Yeah.
it's just because I've done far too many drugs over the years, but but when I look at it, I'm like, all right, you're breaking it down. Primary perspectives, inside, outside, separate, oneness. All right, separate and oneness. Oh my God, the problem with sunglasses there. Um, but yeah, that seems to be a decomposition strategy. It happens to have a nice orthogonal alignment, which is cool. It seems to be descriptive of what oneness would be. Um, and the language is pretty simple and descriptive. So I like this. So um, you mind taking us through?
It's a little tough. I will say, just because the way that we use the symbol for zero in math, and to represent kind of an empty set, and also just to be placeholder, and we use that symbol multiple different ways. So this comes down to the whole issue that you said earlier about communication, is that there we first of all, when you're looking at um, a fundamental structure that is, in the initial oneness of existence, it's going to have properties that are different from every other structure, and so therefore we need to use. It's tough to use terms, symbols, and strategies that have been developed within a relativistic existence, and an existence of multiplicity, to apply and describe that which is the initial existent oneness. So it's a little tough, but and you do see that kind of thing a lot in this space. This, zeros equal to one and equal to infinity, and um,
Well, the sum series equals end up negative 1/12, and you're like, what? How is that even a thing? But apparently the math seems to line up now. Does that math correspond to our actual universe as we know it, so to speak? Hard to tell, but apparently I've heard from some pretty smart folks that if you could find that within, I I think like the exponential of a particular function, it would prove like loop quantum gravity or something like that. I'm probably just making that up there, but it's just very interesting, just how well it maps and just our ability as human beings to just I think our base existence is kind of like pattern matching creatures there. So
Yeah.
for whatever it is, whether it's for our basic necessities to survive, to procreate, to just continue onward there, just our base drives. It's I all I know is Professor Wolfram at one point was saying, "I'm considering writing a blog post about what it is to be a computer," and he's a little bit hesitant because he's like, "Well, I feel like I'm putting too much of myself in it." I'm like, "No, you have to do this,"
Yeah.
and because I operate from the inverse side. Occasionally, folks have I think attempted to ad hominem me by calling me the NPC, which I kind of personally take as a compliment there, where it's like I'm just thinking while I'm out for a run, I'm like, all right, so if I'm out for a run and all of a sudden I'm listening to like some of your deep streams or Wolfram Physics Project stream, and I'm really focusing, I'm using computational power, and I don't notice that little divot in front of me, and I trip and fall right on my face, and I'm like, is that I'm like, do we even know why neutrons fully decay outside a nucleus there? And just depending on the parameterization, I'm like, well, what is the difference between me and like a neutron and a proton and everything? I'm like, depending on how simple you can express what you're saying that either life is or even consciousness, whatever that may be there, it's like, do we really know the difference? And I know on your stream the other day you really started to touch upon that. So how about for the moment, could you maybe get into that a little bit for us here? Just kind of like you were talking about maybe we need to rethink about maybe smashing particles together. Are there ethical consequences? I realize I'm jumping
Yeah.
really far ahead, but
No, it's fine.
I want to put you on full screen and grab my coffee, which is right over there. I don't want to be
Okay.
rude. So
Yeah, no, that's fine.
cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of relevant to, as well. I saw Oppenheimer last night, and and I was just thinking about this even more so. But um, when I first started this project, or earlier on in this project, I had noticed these patterns that were occurring on these different scales of being, and I saw some gender patterns even in the structures of atomic nuclei, and basically it seems like my work implies that protons are the masculine gender on a hadronic level, and that neutrons would be the feminine gender on a hadronic level, and uh, that we even call the family the nuclear family. It's like the same uh, words are used for these structures, which
Hmm.
is interesting. But I thought that I just saw that even isotope patterns matched marriage structure patterns in human history and things like that, and and I started thinking about what is the process of fission even, and when you're smashing neutrons into nuclei and breaking them apart, and you're smashing particles together. It depends on particles, because I think some of them are not sentient, like an electron is not a it does not appear to be a sentient being, according to my work on it. But a proton and a neutron do seem to possibly be sentient beings. And so, is there ethical consequences, or should we be concerned about the morality of how we deal with these structures? When we do anything with them, we are worried about the morality of how we treat animals in the lab. Should we be worried about how the morality of how we treat cells in a lab? Why not one and not the other? Even though obviously it's easier to identify with one and than the other because of the scale that we're at. But if cells we should think about that. Then why not holonic structures below that may be sentient? So if sentience is a fundamental feature of existence, it means that we must kind of consider the ethical, moral implications of how we go about everything.
Where are the boundary conditions there? And
Yeah.
that's an interesting thing there. But well, Lucy's actually positing that neutrons may actually be non-binary in a way, because if you look at it, it's like, okay, a neutron, once it gets out of that nucleus, after about 15 minutes, it decays. Why? I don't know. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of shoots out an electron and an antineutrino, to the best of our knowledge there. That is very interesting, as well as Kitty Bear. Yes, yes. Thank you for joining, Kitty. Good to see you. But that's the thing. It's depending on one's interpretation. And again, I think a lot of that's going to come from perspective, because I know I talked with Lucy a bit there, and she comes from more of an artistic standpoint, and she kind of does it in more of like the circular way there. And what's very interesting about that is, I'm like, all right, I'm seeing that you have it in more of a square form. You can assemble the periodic table and like all. Oh, well, as I remove myself from the stream because I'm a total noob, I clicked the wrong thing. But you can assemble these things in all different ways, and depending on whom you are, your particular perspective, you might view things a little bit differently there. But that is one of the interesting things. So for me too, I also posit it's like, all right, a lot of folks like to say, and I am particular to this as well. I think it's kind of beautiful. What if we're within a black hole? You could use that ADS CFD correspondence and stuff. And if you have the quantum theory and the boundary, the bulk in which we're in there, you're like, whoa, it would be really cool if we're in a black hole or something like that. That would probably explain a lot. But then I'm like, what if it wasn't a black hole? Or maybe if it was a black hole, what would stop it from being, I don't know, a proton, a neutron, or something like that? But I'm like, wait a second, if there were other universi or realms of persistence, and we're just smashing them together, breaking them apart. I'm like, oh my god, does that mean we're committing like genocide? I'm like, that thought crosses my mind. I'm like, okay, these are perhaps things we should consider. So when you said that the other day, I'm like, that resonated with me. So that
Yeah.
really got me to thinking. So should go on to maybe detail a little bit more about when you started to notice these patterns, and how you started to make the connections from physics to maybe like the human realm as we know it, from like the small to the larger. The floor is yours, sir.
Yeah. I think that the connections just seem to come from the start of my work. Like I said, was uh, it is a this whole project is about understanding mind and what is mind, what is the process of mind as well. I think that it's mind is a structure and a process simultaneously. It's got this kind of superposition aspect to its being, because that's what it is. It's, if you even think about the word being kind of implies an existence and an action at the same time, which is it implies um, a structure and a process, and that's what I think that sentience is, and mind is, and so if that is what how we interpret the world, then, which it is, I mean, it just inevitably is, that the process of mind and the structure of mind is going to be responsible for how we view information around us and even within us, and that absolutely has implications on physics. You know, I've heard like Sabine Hassenfelder and others say things like, you know, you don't need like a consciousness has nothing to do with quantum mechanics, because we don't need a conscious being to make an observation. We can have like a sensor do it, of, you know, a machine. And but that's not true at all. You can't have the machine make any measurement without a conscious being to make the machine and then to go and look at the information that comes from the sensor. And so it's, you can't decouple this from us. It's impossible.
we still argue over what an observer is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that I would argue the kind of the opposite is that we all know what an observer is. It's just, it's when we try and disconnect it from ourselves that we can't find it. And then we can't define it because
Oh,
you've made it have a definition that doesn't exist. I mean, you are an observer. Like that, you're not the
so it's
only observer. There's other observers probably, but a mind is an observer. That seems obvious to me. What else would it be? And it's not really. You can't argue against the idea that a mind is an observer without proposing an alternative. And I've yet to really hear one that makes, that really would argue against the idea that a mind is an observer, or a sentient being.
that's a very interesting thing. I think that goes back to boundaries. If you said, it seems like we're just trying to say, all right, there's a boundary here. Is the boundary a little fuzzy? Because if we're setting an arbitrary point, and that's not the actual point, that's going to throw everything into chaos there. And we're just making assumptions there, which maybe there's some truth there. Maybe we're just completely throwing ourselves off. And I see you there, Rick and Courtney. Thank you for joining, my friends. But it's very interesting, just kind of looking at some of these different categorizations or constructions, if you would. You mind taking us through it a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a good segue, because, and this is a work in progress, obviously, and I made this model, or these models are I've been working on them for quite a while, but this, I guess, visual summary is I don't know, it's over a year old, and but it's still more or less similar to my current stance on things. But what the first thing that I needed to conquer, I guess, when I was starting this project was, how do you maneuver and orient beyond relativity? And so this is the issue with what you had just said, which is, where's the boundary of of being, kind of different structures of differentiation? Where are boundaries? And I think that we come up against a wall where we're trying to do two different things in the same space, where we are trying to navigate objective boundaries within a relativistic perspective, and that is not going to work. You have to shift. So what I came up with are these four primary perspectives that are the start of this project, and they are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. And what they are the four perspectives that you can have on being, I guess, and they are all simultaneously self-defining of each other. So inside means separate and oneness. Separate means outside of oneness. Outside means separate from oneness. Oneness means outside of separateness. Kind of outside and or oneness and separate. They're how they are. They could mean outside of separateness, and also outside. They could mean outside and inside of separateness. It's a little bit fuzzy for those specific ones, but what is clear is that they are defining of each other. They are completely entangled. So to be aware of something as being inside means that you are automatically aware of what is separate from you, what is one with you, and what is outside of you. Because you can't be aware of what is inside of you without being also aware of what is outside of you, or what it would mean to be outside of you, even if there's nothing outside of you. But if you're God or something like that, like you would know what it would mean to be outside of you. And this also maps over to what is separate and what is one with you. So there's no way to be aware of any one of those without being aware of all four. And that what these do is they allow you to orient beyond relativistic relationships. So there's no I'm bigger than that, I'm smaller than that, I'm faster than that, I'm stronger than that, I'm brighter than that, I'm darker than that. There is none of
There's no scalar, so to speak.
there's
It seems.
exactly there's no scales, there's no spectrums or scales or the the relativistic linear type of organization that we move information into. It's all just uh, I guess it's objective, which is not. I don't even think that's the right term for it. But I think Lucy actually said once that I needed a different word, and I changed it to super subjective. Is and that might be a better term for it, but it allows you to navigate within multiplicity, but outside of relativity. If that makes sense. And from there, it led to another model, which led to another model, which you know led to the
Could
outline of
you
this.
could you parse that a little bit more when you say outside of relativity?
Um, I mean, out.
I mean, is there a diagram here that I haven't gotten to yet, or
Um, it's kind of the one on the left could kind of be that, but um, it means outside of spatial temporal space,
okay?
beyond space time, essentially. Beyond, there is no time, there is no space, but there are distinctions. There is multiplicity of being, but there isn't um, space or time. At least you're not incorporating it into the the understanding or into the model at this point. So I don't need to include space and time in order to say like I am separate from you and to understand what that means and um, but it does have to do with hierarchical nested relationships between sentient beings, really. So your cells are inside of you, which means they are separate and one with you at the same time. And that is a relationship that is not really relative. It's not taking place in relativistic space, even though we observe, the a structure that is manifested by that relativistic space. You actually don't see it in a fundamental way. You can zoom in and look at a single cell, or you could zoom out and just look at yourself. But there is a both of the you exist at the same time, and there what governs how you orient in that relationship with your cells is inside, outside, separate, and oneness. They are separate. Are they separate from you? Are they one with you? Are they inside of you? Are they outside of you?
Rick is commenting that illusion is outside of relativity. I'm not sure if that's applicable, but just in my mind, so to speak, ironically I use that word mind, but I tend to think a thought, a dream. Now perhaps there's some underlying thing where if we had like was it Laplace's demon, we could measure everything. Could you maybe understand how you had that particular dream? Perhaps. But just as far as most of our current models and everything go, as far as I'm aware, yeah, we're just measuring things like time, space, charge, mass, temperatures, things like that. Versus, I don't know why I was dreaming about being Sonic the Hedgehog and fighting King Koopa and something like that back when I was like 10 years old. It's like, how the heck did we actually get there? And that sounds like something, at least in my mind, I'm like, is that within relativity? I don't know, perhaps, but it's just kind of as you were saying, it's we don't necessarily have a scale. It basically it looks like you've been working on what some may say is the groundwork of a conceptualization, and if the model continues to propagate and we can learn something, and I sit back and like, all right, is everything here necessarily correct in any model? No, of course not. I could be wrong about that. I'd love to be wrong about that, But at the same time, it's the ability to progress, it's the ability to do better and just build upon different levels. And if one piece of anything here is true and we can use that to help benefit humanity, I think that's a win. And if more
Yeah.
of it lines up, that's freaking sweet.
Yeah,
But
it's my attempt was to figure out how do you navigate the assembly of being, which is, it's interesting because you look at like Lee Cronin, his work with assembly theory, and he talks about like assembly time and how, and I think that his work has a lot of crossover with some of the implications of mine, and you're talking about even your dreams, and we think about memory. You can even start thinking about memories. If you're going to think about dreams and thoughts, then think about memories potentially. Why is it that sometimes we can't remember something and then other times we can? And is that information really just stored in our minds like a hard drive? And is there really has been information stored in a hard drive absent somebody to look at the information and know what it means? Uh, that's a question, but it I think his work seems to imply that there's a lot more to our experiences that have to do with the entanglement structure of the cosmos at a specific moment that impacts our constraints and degrees of freedom in anything that we're doing, but especially in what we're thinking and the information that we have access to. So, maybe that has something to do with your Sonic the Hedgehog dream. Is that there's some type of like moment that where things lined up and that's what you got. And
see,
what that
I tend to think of it because I like to watch the old Mario cartoon. Was really big into the Sonic Saturday AM cartoon, and I feel like those things just kind of came together. It's like, oh look, here are this anthropomorphize and just have certain localities and just kind of like plug them all together in some like wacky Fortnite pre-spinoff. But Lucy is actually positing that if you're not including space time, then would you say it's on a semantic slash linguistic level? And Tyler, I remember, I think you were at the Theories of Nothing conference. I could be wrong if you were at this particular one where I believe, oh God, I'm so terrible at these things, but the question was asked, what, what is the base root? And I think most everyone agreed when it was posited language, whatever that language may be, might be at the core. I feel like I answered yes, maybe hesitantly, but I still feel like I answered yes to that. And I forget if you were there or caught that at all.
I was at one of those. I don't know if there was multiple. I think there might have been, and I wasn't at the second one, but I was at the first one. And it's interesting. Chris Langan mentions that as well, and I have had like deep philosophical debates about this years ago with people, and I was somebody who's never been very good at language, I guess. So but I've always been good with picturing things in my mind, and so I was arguing that language wasn't necessary to understanding things all the time, and they were positing the opposite. And um, but then after going through this process, I think that language is it is so incredibly essential to constructing. Uh, I don't want to say abstract, but models of the not immediately happening around you, and or happening to you even, and because when I started this work, it was that first four primary perspectives, which are basically just four words that all each are defined by each other, that led to me being able to make any progress. And it was like from there, the next step seemed very natural. And from there, the next step seemed very natural. And every time that I've had a major breakthrough, or most of the time that I've had a major breakthrough in this project, it has been due to my shift, my either like def- defining of something or labeling of something as in a way that is accurate to what I'm trying to convey, or in coming up with some type of linguistic framework that allows me to make progress. And so it's definitely very much uh, linked to language, but it's more that that is like a shadow cast by the mind, I think, in that uh, it's like if you have a window, and it's got like and it's a bunch of different stained glass, parts to it, a mosaic or something, and you shine a light through it onto the wall, you would see these patterns show up, and it would show you what is kind of going on, allow you to navigate what that window picture is. But that window itself is it is the mind. And so mind would be more fundamental than language, but language is how we convey even to ourselves what in our own minds, when we are communicating with ourselves, how we are going to connect information. Language is how we connect some information to other bits of information, which kind of makes information in a way. But even more fundamental than that is that there is a someone speaking that is more fundamental. The speaker is more fundamental than even like what is spoken, I guess. But they're very similar. And where's the line there? I don't know. If I think maybe whether or not there is a line there is dependent upon what exactly you are focused on. But it's a we're getting into a realm of where it's we don't have the language properly formatted in many ways to describe what's actually happening, because it's not the problems with this with finding like what is fundamental and describing it is not that it is so complicated. And we have this concept, due to, I think, just education and culture and academia especially, that as we get more fundamental, the more complicated it must get. And that is actually contrary to the logic of logic itself. And so, but the issue is that it's super simple. It's always around us. So finding aspects of where we can isolate a situation that we can describe is the tough part, because not because it's so rare and it's so distant from us, but because it's so intrinsic to us and it's constantly there. And if you looked through a window constantly your entire life, and you had it was like this far away from you, you wouldn't even know it was there. It's like the forest through the trees problem. I'm trying to use a
Yeah,
metaphor.
the fish in the water there. It's
Exactly.
like,
It's a fish
how
in
do
the
you
water.
like that water? What water? What are you talking
Exactly.
about?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
just where we are. It's very interesting because it also seems a little bit antithetical to something like the Wolfram Physics Project, where the whole core of that, it's our universe as we know it may be built up from some fairly simple rules and everything. And I think, uh, uh, even within Professor Wolfram, still need to finish reading, but just even things like oh god, you can't see it with like the green
Oh, there we
screen
go.
there, but essentially that column there, it actually doesn't appear to repeat, and it literally seems to be, as far as we understand it, random, so to speak. Which also happens to be just the other half seems to be very just congruent and everything. But then it's like, even I believe Professor Feynman at the time was using, they had the big laser printout. He's going there. He's like, I'm going to estimate it's like 2.25 inches or something degrees or something like that. And like, it wasn't that there. And then he goes to Stephen Wolfram at the time, and he's like, how did you know it was going to be random? And Professor Wolfram was like, I didn't. He's like, okay, good. Oh, you had me worried that you knew something that I didn't. And he tells that story, and I'm just like, that's pretty cool. Hey, welcome, Bone. That's pretty cool. And Rick has commented, we often have things that are not actual things. That is a bold statement, my friend. Uh,
Yeah, that's my work. I'm working on a paper, and it's proven to be like I'll write a bunch and then I'll be like, no, I don't like it, and then I'll write 10 pages and then scrap it, and it was proving to be very difficult for a while. But I actually made came up with a. I think I figured out the issue, part of the issue with this, and there's a few different problems with trying to write a paper that outlines a fundamental theory, and but it's navigating them is unique experience. But
How, go
it
on.
it divides, my model divides the world into things and beings, basically. And you could even say things, thoughts, and beings, but not really, like, because we're going to get into a debate about idealism and what is matter itself. And if it's all mind, then that doesn't then matter is a matter of perspective. But it's
Well, that would be an interesting divisor because then it's literally mind divided by matter.
yeah, it seems like the thoughts of the mind that we're in would trump the thoughts of ourselves, so we would experience those thoughts as concrete reality. So even within idealism, if there's a nested hierarchy of mind, then the hierarchy of this you know fractal structure of mental structure is necessary to kind of, and seems to naturally also explain why some things appear to be in our own, I don't want to say head, but in our own mind, and then other things seem to be something we can't
Yeah.
just change with in the immediacy with our own thought. Uh, things and beings are divided in my work. Things are in relativity. Beings create relativity. So things are the perceptions of beings. They Beings are not made of things, in like is kind of the, I guess,
Be,
establishment narrative. It's that things are made by beings and are perceived by beings, but beings precede and are fundamental to things.
beings are kind of like some of the core stuff that are doing things,
Yeah.
so to speak, in a very just rudimentary sense there. And especially if you're trying to literally, shout out to Professor Wolfram again, present somewhat of a new kind of science, so to speak, there. How can you do that without writing like 400 pages?
Yeah, or I think it's like it it's tough, because do you do it in 4 pages or do you do it in 4,000 pages? If it's and that and if you can do it in 4,000 pages, where do you stop? If it's a theory, like, as so if beings precede things, then a theory of everything kind of comes from a theory of everyone, and which is a theory of beings, um, that focuses on beings. And so, but that's kind of describes the pattern that is ever present, which means it's kind of never ending, and you can keep coming up with new scenarios in which you can observe this pattern. So one of the things that I found is that there seems to be this pattern, this like binary triadic pattern, that I've been calling the symmetric set more recently, but it's not in that page, but it's in my models page if you click it. And I'm not saying every single one that is in this example is, you can scroll down, keep going. There it is. Go up a bit and then zoom into that, right to the left of that. So, no, to the right, where the green and, yeah, that's right there. So this seems to be this pattern of two sets of three or three sets of two, that, and it's both. It's that is it's a categorization structure and process of information that appears to be happening everywhere that we look. And you can find infinite examples, literally, and probably infinite examples, maybe not, but if it's not infinite, then it's very high number of examples that it's practically infinite of examples of this pattern, because you can take even one of those within each of these, zoom in even more, find that pattern again, take one of them, zoom in even more, find that pattern again, and you can do that going out. So, but this is just how our minds are organizing information via symmetry structures into a hierarchy and kind of a causal chain, and also differentiating it all at the same time. So you can see order of operations in mathematics. You've got, PEMDAS, and you can see this in the quarks, up, down, strange, truth, beauty, or top, or bottom, however you want to label those last ones. You can see it in the leptons. You can see it in forces and senses and your limbs. Even you look at an arm, and you could look at your limbs and you could do this, and then you could look at arm alone and you could be like, it's an arm, a hand, and fingers. But then you could look at a finger and you could do the same exact thing. And what it's coming from is your mind. So that's why it's occurring everywhere, is that you look, because you're doing it.
I mean, I think that's pretty fantastic, and I think I maybe had mentioned this before. This was when my friend Jen from the Church of Entropy YouTube channel. She's been talking about, sounds like kind of similar things, and I think she was coming from. It's interesting because we all kind of have our own perspectives, and I think you were positing, and I think I've also heard Professor Wolfram posit at some points where he's kind of like, I think we're all kind of right, that we're kind of honing in on the same area. I think we're trying to talk about the same thing. We're just coming at it from different perspectives here. I'm going to be. I have something to ask you about, something about sevens, because I saw something about the division of sevens here.
Okay.
Do you mind going in a little bit about that at all, Tyler?
Yeah, it's just that I've noticed specifically certain patterns in my models, and also in just numbers in general, where um, the division by seven kind of seems to just it unlocks more information in a way. It kind of like I don't know if this is like, I'm not very prepared for this question, to be quite honest. I haven't thought about how to describe this exactly, but there is something about division by seven that is highly relevant to kind of the containing containership of information that is in our cosmos. I don't have the best answer to state right now. I need to think more about how to word it.
Perhaps maybe like a change in or break in symmetry of some
Yeah,
scale or something.
it is a breaking of symmetry. That's like a very good kind of way to put it. Is that there's something about dividing by seven that causes a symmetry breaking, that allows for like a nestedness to kind of manifest, is the best way I can put it. But I think it has something to do with the fact that there's one being, and it's containing of these six different categories of information that are in this model even. But then you also have that all containing mind that is part of that as well. It is in and of itself a container, and so that's seven. And I think that has something to do with that. But it's a bit tough to describe, because I have not thought about how to answer that question long enough. But it is interesting that there is some type of pattern that seems to be recurring there. And when you look at even when you divide 1 by 7, I noticed that you got this repeating decimal of 6 different numbers, and that was interesting to me, that that seemed to occur, and that it falls within exactly this this kind of symmetry structure, this symmetric set that I call that I have here, and this binary triality pattern. But I think that I have a theory, and I don't know if this is true or not, but that this is what the Calabi-Yau manifold is in string theory, and it I've heard it described by, I think it was Eric Weinstein was quoting Ed Witten in saying that there was a six-dimensional manifold at every point in space and time, and you hear that and you're like, what does that even mean? But when you think about what this is, it seems to be that there is this six-dimensional manifold structure of information categorization that is apparent every point that you focus, everywhere that you look. And that sounds a lot like a six-dimensional manifold structure that occurs at every point in space and time. So I think that this is relevant to that. It might be that this Calabi-Yau manifold is, and I think that this is true of a lot of quote unquote higher dimensional physics objects that people talk about, is that they are related to the structures of information processing in a mind. And it's like we'll find them everywhere in the math that we look, but we're not going to find them anywhere almost if we're looking for a little physical object type of situation. And it's because of the fish in water, scenario, that this is coming from us. And it's also, if we are inside a mind itself, it's also, coming from that mind. So it's really,
we're part of the system.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you can see it with everywhere that we look, who, what, where, when, why, and how. Okay. Like, what other questions are there?
I like that you did that. I'm just like, oh God, are we going to actually get back to some of the old school journalism by trying to figure out everything? Is that what it's going to take? It seems. I'm not saying that hashtag not all, but it just seems like I think a lot of us are just following non-optimal incentives, in my opinion.
Yeah, we think we need to figure out what are the optimal incentives, which would come from a theory of fundamental reality. I think that is one of the major obstacles, though, that a fundamental theory faces. But it's also one of the major concerns with presenting one, is that it has implications about morality that are concrete. And that doesn't mean that the truth that we end up at won't be more beautiful than any that we could have individually conceptualized. I think that is going to be the truth. I don't believe that it's, from what I've seen, reality, or the cosmos, the conscious cosmos, God, however, whatever you want to call that being, and the process and structure that it's going through, and that's being created by it, is the most beautiful structure that could possibly exist. Of course, it almost has to be, because it's containing of every other beautiful structure that we can imagine and that we've perceived. And so I don't think that we should fear like an ugly truth, like, oh, what if we uncover the ugly truth? Even if the truth isn't exactly the way we would ideally want it to be, given our limited perspective, I think that if we actually knew more, we would uncover that whatever is true is going to be even more beautiful than what we would have wanted from our limited perspective. And so I don't think that we should fear anything that we discover. But I do think that it's wise to be concerned with how humanity interprets things.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I would agree with Sully down there. Yes, fresh air and guacamole are quite beautiful. Yes, Rick, tasty snacks, I assume, are one of the most beautiful things our taste buds can interact with there, even though if you break down the individual truth, all the high fructose corn syrup and everything, oh, it's horrible. But it leads to a higher level experience, I'll posit.
It's funny, one of the Eric Weinstein, I asked him once about his like observerse, and he was breaking this down into this, you know, into he was. I asked him about dimensions, and he was talking about how when you have take a bite of something, and he's also has talked about this on, I think, on Lex Fridman's channel, that you have this, you have sweet and sour and salty and bitter, and you have these different taste sensations. And when I took those and put them into the model that you had just had on the screen, it does see they lined up perfectly. There was like this 6 dimensions of flavor and taste, and I was like, wow, that's to be expected at this point. So it's like 6 different flavors that we can experience, and they follow that same exact pattern that is in that model. I think
See,
it's like
further
sweet,
down.
sour, salty, bitter, um, umami, and hot and heat. So it's like
Oh, I
cold and
saw that.
heat.
Where was that?
Was
Was it
it
there?
was up above if you
Oh,
were looking for it, um, right there in the center.
oh, here. This
I don't
guy.
know if the taste ones are included on there, but I do have them, mapped in one of my examples somewhere. But you can do this with your senses, and it's right kind of in the center there of the screen. You could there was like senses. You have your eyes, your sense of sight, your sense of smell, your sense of hearing. Then you have your sense of touch, and you have your sense of taste, and you have your emotions as well. But what's interesting is that these are nested and arranged in a specific pattern that is kind of um, uh, cross-examinable in a way. It depends on what you're doing on whether or not you look at it as 3 sets of 2 or 2 sets of 3. But when you think about what you are when you're interpreting information, so let's say you have these 6 different senses. 3 of them are for sensing information that you perceive as separate from you. So your sense of smell, your sense of sight, and your sense of hearing are for perception of things beyond you. Then you have 3 senses that you interpret information as being touching you, or one with you, essentially, which is your sense of touch, your sense of taste. You have to touch your tongue to something in order to taste it. You have to touch something in order to feel it, with your sense of touch. And emotion is kind of like this all-encompassing one. There's always one of them that kind of encapsulates the rest. But it's this like super um, uh, super literal sense of touch. It's like when you see something, or that's a painting that you like, or you hear a piece of music that you like, you say like, that song really touched me, or that song moved me. It's like it actually impacts you. Like
Using both meanings, like hyperbolically and whatever it may be initially. Oh, that's
it's like it
interesting.
metaphysically moves you.
Oh.
And so there's 3 levels to information that you perceive as directly impacting you: touch, taste, and emotional impact. And then there's 3 levels of information perception of information that you perceive as separate from you: hearing, sight, and smell. And they're also, they have, your sense of taste and your sense of smell. People will say they're kind of the same thing, but they are just, one of them is perception that of something that's separate from you, and something that's one with you. And it depends on your goal, on whether or not, on how you your mind uses this structure in order to decide whether or not, like, in order to orient within it. So it's interesting because I remember being a little kid and smelling a bar of soap that smelled like strawberries, and I was like, this smells like the best smoothie I could ever drink. And I remember tasting it and being like, this is disgusting, I'm not going to eat this. And
Don't
so
eat the soap.
exactly, so because of my goal, my one sense overrid the other, and allowed me to orient and not eat the soap. But then if you go and I had a friend of mine, and I bought a durian fruit. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a very stinky fruit that smells not good, but it actually tastes very good. I think it does. And so you smell it and you're like, this smells like rotten cheese, but you taste it and it tastes like vanilla and, like creamy vanilla or something. It's very,
It's something you're not weren't expecting.
yep. And so then you'll eat it, but like you'll eat it despite it smelling terrible. But it's your goal that kind of changed how you are examining this symmetry structure from, and it allows you to orient and decipher this information properly. Uh, but there is a hierarchy that is present, and that hierarchy is partially dependent. It is directional and on you can't alter it, but it does. It is goal specific in its application.
Okay, so here's a question that just popped into my mind here. Would you say that perhaps experience, or perhaps even in your form of information, affects these sentient singularities, if you would? I mean, maybe that's just obvious there, but that just because in my mind, it's like, okay, if I smell a bar of soap and it smells very tasty, I'm probably going to taste it too, especially if I'm a kid. Now,
Yeah.
also, if I smell a piece of fruit that smells like hot garbage or moldy cheese, I'm probably not going to put it in my mouth unless somebody's like, no, 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 you need to really try it. They try a piece and then I try it. I'm like, okay, that was surprisingly good. So that experience or that additional information, if you would, affects sentient singularities? Or
Yeah. It's we are this we are a structure and process that is also um, a summation of information that's constantly being added to us. So it's while the structure of mind does not change, um, I think it is fixed just because of its intrinsic constraints. Uh, we are impacted by what information is fed into it for sure, and it alters how we what we're able to do going forward and things like that, and it can improve or even harm our ability to orient going forward. So it is absolutely, this stuff is fascinating because it just causes you to think about yourself a lot, and why we do certain things, why we eat certain things, why we don't eat certain other things, why we have the tastes that we do, why we perceive even the colors that we do. There's three primary colors and three secondary colors. That is the same exact thing. That also falls into that binary triadic symmetric set that we just looked at, or that I think is a Calabi manifold. It's we see these six colors because of the structure of mind itself.
that's interesting, right there, huh? I never thought of that in that way before. And speaking of thinking that way, I noticed this right over here. And at first I'm like, oh, it's the golden ratio. I'm like, wait a second, no, this isn't the golden ratio, is it? This appears to be something different. What's uh
Yeah.
what's going on here?
So this is just some of these models are me. There are core models to my work, which
Mm-hmm.
would be the four primary perspectives, the uh, the quantum of cognition or quantum of consciousness. I don't really know what to call it. I've been trying to avoid using the word consciousness, but it does seem to fit well with that. That builds from the four primary perspectives. It's a 3x3 matrix looking thing, and then from there you get this what I call the cosmological verse, which is that um, diamond shaped uh, cosmos model of an atom is an assembly of hadrons and etc. that we had looked at the beginning, and those are the main kind of models of my work. They each one is built on the previous, but then there's a lot of models here that are on this page that are me just examining how information coherence occurs. And so that's one of that. The one that you had seen is with the 90-degree angles, around each other. It's basically showing that a change in direction, which is like a complete, change, as objective a change as we can kind of imagine, which is kind of a 90-degree change. But it's hard because again, we're using terms that are that are, that occur within and are constructed to deal with a relativistic space, and then are trying to examine kind of a fundamental um, structure, which is you'll definitely see crossover patterns, but they're not exactly the same there.
I
But what I did see is that
mm,
you take four 90-degree turns to go all the way around something, and that ends up being 360, and then you do it again, and that ends up being 720. And so what's interesting is that you hear physicists say that the universe goes through 720 degrees of rotation, and
4 or 5.
it's yeah, it seems like this is what it is, and this is just a metaphor. So I'm not saying that this is a perfect metaphor, but it's just a metaphor. The way that I thought about this when I first was looking at this is, imagine you are like a floating head in a room, and you need to like look all the way around, or you're on a plane and you need to look all the way around. You spin 360 degrees around, you see all around you, but then also you can, in order to see what is above you and below you, you spin again, but like the opposite direction. And
Mm,
you could also think about this in another way, is that if 360-degree rotation to look all around you is to get a complete picture, and you're a mind inside a mind, for you to look all the way around you and for that mind to look all the way around, you get this kind of double cover of perception that occurs, where uh, you that's where I think that is responsible, this interaction between two minds taking a complete observation of, the mind that we're within is taking a complete observation of itself and of you, and you are taking a complete observation of what is around you. And as this is happening, you're getting this double coverage effect, where it kind of seems to, in a relativistic model type of way. I don't even know if relativistic is the right way to put it, because it's really not. It's not really that relativistic, but it does seem to map to it, which is this 720 degrees of rotation. I don't think that these units of measurement that we have are as arbitrary. I don't want to say subjective. They are subjective, but they're not as arbitrary as many people would assume.
mm,
They seem to be kind of in these inevitable ways of looking at information, which why do we use base 10? There's a reason. Why do we use base 12 though? There's also a reason, because it's, highly divisible, and
mhm.
my work implies that there's even more reasons why these two quantities in and of themselves are two different ways of looking at fundamental information. And I have this term in my work that is to describe these phenomenon that I observe, that just make, the more you point it out though, the more you end up looking like a crazy person, which is I call it extra arithmetic symmetry. And
Oh,
it's where you observe a fundamental pattern, or you observe information in a specific instance, or from a specific perspective, where it also allows you to perceive a symmetry structure that you would otherwise think was not related to the information that you are kind of observing. So it happens with language all the time as well. I've noticed, especially, is that, and even, you know it's like the crossover between language and mathematics is, you'll see this a lot. You'll see that certain structures and symbols and things like that end up having meaning in how you examine them and the information that they convey, that is not it's not just arithmetic. It's beyond just math. It's like in the limited way that we think about it. But the thing is that everything is connected. People say that, and it becomes kind of a like a, I don't know, just
It's like a throwaway statement. If you
yeah,
would,
it's like a
people say it so
cliche.
much, people discount it.
It's all connected. We're all entangled. But the thing is that that is inevitably true, and you do have to. That doesn't mean that every instance, every way that we um, interpret information is the most optimal or accurate to whatever it is that is our goal, but it does mean that there is a pattern and of causality and a chain of causality that does run through everything and everyone.
I mean, right there, I'm hearing echoes of George Lucas and just the force running through all things. And again, that might be from a piece of more modern media that, depending on your perspective and stuff, may or may not have been as great recently. But that's a different thing. But just that
Yeah,
concept of
may
yeah,
not. Yeah,
it's a my personal opinion, just my
me
personal
too. I
opinion.
think. Yeah.
But no, but just that whole concept of a force running through all things. I mean, that also was, I believe, conceptualized. I forget who it was, but as the vis visa, like the living force. And like we have these ideas, and it's like, oh, well, that's an idea. And it gets accepted for a while, kind of like the ether and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden we get something new, and all of a sudden we kind of like cast away those other ideas, and as some of those ideas really seem to be bubbling up again and stuff.
It's
Just
it's
it's
very funny.
fascinating.
I heard Brian Keating, who is a friend of mine. So this is not a dig at all. Like he's a very good scientist. He puts out a ton of
Oh, I
incredible.
shout out Professor Keating. He helped get me into a lot of this stuff, just a lot of his work. So hey, shout out to Professor Keating.
Yeah, huge shout out to Brian Keating. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. But I heard him say at some point, and I don't remember exactly what conversation it was, but he was like, oh well, there was this conceptualization of the ether, and then now we've know that that doesn't exist. And I was like, do we even know what ether is? Can we, before we say that there, because it does seem like there is this there is a model in my work that is right in front of you, and it's labeled there as the I called it's just, it looks like a 14-dimensional structure, and I called it an observerse in quotes because that's not my term, and I don't. This might not be. Eric Weinstein might not agree with this being connected to
It's in quotes.
his
It's in
observerse.
quotes.
It's
And
in
even
quotes.
my even my pace one entry, I put theory of everything in quotes because I'm not a big fan
Yeah.
of that term. So
I love the term observerse, and I don't want to take it from Eric Weinstein. That's his term. He gets to say what it is. But based on certain discussions that I have had and things that I've heard him say about it, it does seem related to this structure that I have kind of in front of this here. And basically, I've just been calling it this, like the manifold of like maneuverability. Essentially, I don't really have like a good term for it because I think observerse is a great term, but I don't want to take it, so I'm kind of at a stuck right now. But it's where your four-dimensional mind, which comes from these four primary perspectives that every mind observes in any kind of simultaneous observation, and that uh, that there's we're a nested hierarchy of four-dimensional minds inside of four-dimensional minds. You're a four-dimensional mind inside a cosmological four-dimensional mind with four-dimensional minds of cells inside of you. And so this interaction between one four-dimensional mind inside of another causes this symmetry structure, which I think is responsible for even the observation of what we call space-time, where you have this overlap that occurs and causes uh, this three-dimensional like central space, but it's actually two degrees of freedom plus an intrinsic constraint, and then there's this extrinsic constraint on the outside. So if you're thinking about space-time with us, we have if you're thinking about space-time, we say for length, width, height, or we'll say x, y, z. But this is kind of within a relativistic goal the framework of a goal in relativity. But if we try and make it more objective or super subjective and more fundamental, then you could say that forwards and backwards and current location instead of length, width, and height, or X, Y, Z. Because now, once you've oriented it within the context of sentience, you could say, I have a goal. My goal is to go to Chick-fil-A. I can go forwards towards my goal. I can go backwards away from my goal, but I'm always in my current location because I am the definer of it. So it's an intrinsic constraint, just like it's basically you're always in the present moment in a time kind of way of thinking about things, but you're also always in your current location. So this is an over this is an intrinsic constraint, but then there's 2 degrees of freedom: forwards towards a goal, backwards away from your goal. But then that's within space time from us being looking out, being inside looking out. But if you're the universe and you're looking in, you're the way in which you maneuver is not in space time, but in what I just call time space. It's just the reverse, where you have 2 degrees of freedom, which is kind of forwards towards a goal, backwards away from your goal, but you're always in the present moment, and that's your intrinsic constraint. But your extrinsic constraint as the universe itself is space, because you are space. So it is your extrinsic constraint, whereas us being inside looking out, our intrinsic constraint is our current location, but our extrinsic constraint is time, because we are subject to it and we cannot, it's anything you're subject to. So if you're the universe, you're subject to, you are existence itself, you're subject to the constraints of just
Existence.
Your own self. There is nothing beyond you, so you can't move outside of you. So the constraints of space is space because you are space. Whereas us being in the universe, which is kind of this dynamic structure, information processing structure, we are subject to time. But I thought about this, and I use this. I have this video on my YouTube channel. It's very old, but it's called like Space Time and the Observerse or something like that. And I use this metaphor of, imagine we're a guppy inside of a sentient bucket, and this bucket is spinning, and we observe this as like fluid that is spinning around us because we can maneuver within it. So it has to be kind of fluid. It's not something that's solid because you can maneuver within it. But and that time is kind of our perception of time. It looks like it's flowing by us like a river, but really you're a guppy inside this bucket that's spinning, and it's filled with this fluid ether, maybe you could call it that. And it's going by you faster than you can swim. So no matter what, like you can't, it will move you forwards because it goes faster than you can swim backwards. So you could also think about space-time as, the processing speed of the clock speed of a hard drive on a computer, and that's why the speed of light is the speed of causality, and you can't go faster than that because you would be exceeding the RAM speed of the computer. And so there's different ways in which you can think about just the conceptualization of time, but one of them is in this kind of interactive fluid space, of a spinning bucket guppy in it, and that sounds like what you could call the ether, but I'm not saying it exists objectively. I hear.
Hey, no ether, Tyler. Maybe a superfluid that kind of sounds like an ether, but no ether.
Exactly. And it's not really the main concern of my work, because my work seems to imply that this would be an observation of us and not necessarily something. It's caused by us. It's not by it's not that it exists. The observation of kind of a fluid dynamicness to the universe is something that's caused by our minds. Not it's not so much that it is fundamentally a fluid. It is fundamentally a mind in my model. But
Would
and
that be connected to kind of what Tommy's saying here? Sorry to cut you off.
no, go ahead.
Tommy is positing that time is subjective, though. That's why a child perceives time at a different rate than an adult.
I think about that too. Sometimes I think about, I said once to my wife, I think old people move so slowly because time moves so fast for them. And it's
Whoa.
like, it made me think a lot about just, summers used to be really long. Now they're like that. But when you,
Dude, a day used to just go by. Well, it seemed to you be like a week, and a week seemed like
yeah,
a month, and now it's like, oh my god, 7 years have gone by since Shin Godzilla came out. I'm like,
which of course
whoa.
that would be the case.
Yeah.
Every time you add another day,
Hmm.
it comprises a smaller amount of the whole. So it's, that makes sense with how our minds would even observe this segmentation of information of days and weeks and months and years, and it makes sense that that would be the way that it would be. So
Okay. Cool. All right. We've been going for over an hour and 40 minutes. I know your time is valuable. It's the weekend. You're a very busy man. Um, Anything else you want to touch upon while you're here, man?
um uh i I can go longer if there's
Yeah.
anything that you would like to talk about. But if you would like to wrap it up here for now, then that's also fine with me. There's nothing really specific that I can think of uh, that I would want to mention
How
other than
about
what we've talked
how about this? How about this? We're gonna put you on the spot here.
about. Okay,
You, sir, say you have a paper coming out at some point, looking like maybe by the end of this year.
better be.
What are you willing to share with us, if you could?
um, I I think that we could go and look at the on my website specifically. There is the abstract of the paper on writings at the top, and
Okay.
I have quite a bit more done than this, but uh, it's basically just describing of the models that I have that are kind of comprising of the theory, and that's what the paper is.
My first impressions. I feel like I clicked on this before a while back, but now that I'm noticing, I love that you have your technical description and the poetic description there. Because what did they say in like one of the movies where like people are stepping a foot on like a different planet? It's like we should have sent the poets instead of the scientists to better be able to capture what is actually going on. So I think that's a beautiful thing. I know Lucy's really big into music and everything, and just some of her perspectives there. Just I don't know. It's we learn from each other. I think that's pretty cool. So, all right,
Yeah,
we got the technical description here. So, what would you like to? Oh, this is from over a year ago. So, oh,
yeah.
cool.
This is. It took me a very long time to even write this because one of the things that I noticed is I would write it and it would seem like very obvious to me, and then I would give it to somebody and be like, "Do you understand what I'm saying?" And they'd be like, "No." And eventually I realized that there are certain words that we have associations with that were throwing people off, like the word singularity, and like especially the word singularity. This was what was throwing people off. The issue is it's also the perfect word for what I'm trying to describe, so I wasn't going to throw it out, but I added in a description of what it is, and then all of a sudden I gave it to people, and people understood it. So, but it took about probably half a year for me to figure out that one little issue. So, yeah, but yeah, I can read it and then we can talk about it. But
Sure.
it's that sentient singularity theory describes the totality of existence as a singularity of sentience that is creating additional sentient singularities within itself. Sentience is the phenomenon of feelings, sensations, and emotions. Singularity is defined as something that is one distinct unit or as something that is especially unique. Sentient singularity theory also denotes a singularity as a structure that has the property of infinite oneness, such as a Mobius strip, or one being that is composed of many beings, such as a multicellular organism. And just as a side note, my work seems to imply that just infinity just means, um, in the way that we can best describe it, as something that has a starting point but doesn't end, and it's just multiplicity going on forever from a start point. I think we get very thrown off by the word infinity, and we think it's so beyond us, but that's because we try and think about it as a static, unchanging quantity that's also endless, which does not exist. But if you think about this as a process of just one, being added again and again and again forever, then that is a way that you can think about it. And you can also think about it as, this single
Circle, Mobius strip, or something. No, that's cool.
yeah. And then, uh, and that's two components to it: never-ending growth, but also, you know, uh, continuously circling back. Being self-contained is what causes that. But sentient singularity theory, therefore, can be understood to imply that everything that exists is part of a single universal sentient being that is producing an infinitely growing number of other sentient beings within itself. These additional singularities of sentience or self-aware beings are arranged into a nested quasi-periodic fractal pattern of stacked holonic structures. This pattern forms a single self-reflective knot of perception heading an assembly body that integrates multiple entangled strings of information. A sentient singularity observes four primary perspectives, which are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. These four perspectives are interdependent and entangled. As the awareness of one of them entails the awareness of all four, the primary perspectives enable the perception and orientation of oneself within objective relationships that transcend beyond relativity. Given that each sentient singularity is informed by multiple entangled perspectives, and that perspectives are axiomatically the viewpoints perceived by sentient beings, it follows that a sentient singularity and the entangled perspectives that inform it are simultaneously generative of each other. Sentient singularity theory characterizes the fundamental building blocks of the cosmos to be sentient beings, and that sentience is the universally defining and animating feature of everything in existence. Sentient singularity theory posits that space, time, matter, force, and all other observable phenomena are emergent from the motivations, interactions, perceptions, and cognitive constructs of sentient beings. If sentience is the primary structure of reality, then a true, final, ultimate, or master theory that unifies and contextualizes all other scientific theories is more than a theory of everything, it is a theory of everyone. And then it just ends with, beyond the beginning, sentience exists, existence is sentient, and sentience is one. And that's kind of, in one sentence, completely describing of, I think, reality.
That's very beautiful. And it looks like you have a picture of one of your models there, which coincidentally kind of reminds me of a computer chip.
Yeah, it is very interesting. It's like if you look, it's like a super Penrose stairs in a way too. It like goes around endlessly, but also has these like levels as it goes back and forth. It's zigzagging, and it's as it goes through these levels of periodicity. It's just that model that we looked at the beginning of a hadron is an assembly of
Right.
and etc. But it's just got all the quantities that are calculated within it, and that model that we looked at, it is a calculating model. Every quantity in there, I didn't put that in there. It is built on just calculations that I have that come from the preceding model, where information that is input is added and multiplied at the same time, and so it just gets incorporated, and then it spits out the quantities that are there. But I just deleted all the quantities, deleted all the shading, and the labels, and that is the structure that I ended up with. And I'm not a good artist. Other than photography, I really don't have any artistic abilities. So that was quite a beautiful thing for me to.
Oh, don't worry about it, dude. My thumbnails are literally, let me take like a screenshot or like a JPEG of something. Maybe like if I have a guest like you, a professor, will like spend at least a minute or so trying to just cut out a decent photo and everything, and then superimposing it on some background with a picture of their work or something
If
like
you
that.
go
Like
look at my old ones, there's definitely a process that I got to with mine, which is not even that great either.
I actually think it's a little bit charming and stuff. It's like, this is blatantly what I'm doing. You can do it too, as long as it conveys a point. It's kind of neat. Hey, it does the job there. But
Yeah.
Tommy is positing down here before we wrap up. maybe our problem is we need to look at everything within our limited scope of start to finish. And I think that's where, Tyler, you actually kind of started from here, if I'm not incorrect there, and that you spent a
Yep.
lot of time doing introspection, and I totally feel you on that. After I took an abnormal psychology class and they taught us about that, I oh God, how long I've spent the past 20 years just analyzing my mind and just, oh, it's been a pain in the butt some of the time.
Yeah, I would recommend that anybody who's more interested in learning more about this project watch my video theories of everything, the how-to guide that was the pace one entry, and in it I basically state that um, we if we want to find a fundamental framework for reality, then instead of trying to combine quantum mechanics and general relativity, which in a way does give you it is related to this, but it's better to start from scratch completely, and that was this project is we have to re-examine our current exam conclusions about things, and even the way that we describe things, as we talked about with word with language earlier. Questions that we have like what is the or how the or on the origins of life. What if we don't have life properly defined? What if we don't know? Which is what my work would imply, is that there is no or like if existence is sentient, is that if something is sentient, is that alive? Like then where is the origin? There isn't an origin problem anymore. The question is
Ooh.
the problem itself. So like we have when we change our language and our perception, all of a sudden it certain things become very intuitive. Questions seem to answer themselves, or you kind of sometimes realize that the question has no answer and it's a bad question. Therefore, we shouldn't ask it.
Well, it's one of those things, and actually, what you said right there may actually explain, because actually, Professor Wolfram, on a lot of his live streams, he'll take questions from the audience. He's actually answered a fair amount of my questions and occasionally comments, for better or worse. But one of the questions I found interesting that I posited for about a good month period that I don't think he ever touched upon. Now I think I know why. Is I kept asking him, like, are stars alive?
It's a
And
question I've
I
asked.
asked that question, and I'm like, because I'm sitting there, it's like, well, what is life? Depends on, again, the definition, but colloquially, as far as I know it as a dude on the internet, it's basically that which is born, that which can achieve homeostasis, and that which can reproduce. And I'm like, if that's all I have, I'm like, I don't they call it panspermia for a reason? I don't know there, but
If
that's
that's the
one
case,
of,
then our corporations alive. That's it's tough because we have to.
yeah.
Is life something that can be described, or is sentience life? Is if something is not can something be alive and not be sentient? I think is a question that we should ask. And if it can be alive and not be sentient, then that definition of life probably does include. It seems like it would include stars. If it only means that which is sentience, then I mean, my model would say probably not, but they come close to displaying a lot of those qualities. So it's it is we I guess it would inevitably depend on how we just define the word life. But I do think that, and it would be implied even by my models. I think that there's two. We have a choice in how we define life. But we have 2 degrees of freedom in how we could define it. It could either mean this, or it could either mean that, and either one is correct. But it could only be either one of those that we choose, and kind of that's more like the my work would suggest that is the answer, is that we can define it different ways and we can choose which one, but it is one of the two. So it's like a meta. It doesn't tell you whether or not stars are alive, but it will tell you whether or not um, you know how the 2 different ways in which you could define life, I guess.
That's, I mean, that's starting to sound quite back to binary as far as perhaps what we're trying to code here. And that in and itself is also interesting. So, did you want to go through the poem at all, or?
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
I was going to say we could just wrap up with that. That'll probably take us to
Yeah.
like 2 hours.
Yeah. So this is just, I've never really written poems before. I'm not a poet, but I was on my way home from work once, and
Hmm.
I had this like all of a sudden idea, and I just felt very compelled to write it down. And when I got home, and I have kind of changed a bit of the words over time, but it's basically remained the same. And it's just says, I don't even know if this is a poem. I have no idea what this is, to be quite honest. I just called it a poetic description. But
Cool.
it says, beyond the beginning, sentience exists, existence is sentient, and sentience is one. The sentience is one and sovereign and eternal and alone, and wills to create another. Sentient one divides their singular beingness to multiply and manifest meaning. The sacrificial spirit of the willing one emanates within to generate and animate creation. And people can read the rest of it, and it might be better if they even read it themselves. But it basically, then it just says this is the beginning. So basically, it just states that this is a pattern that I think occurs basically everywhere, and on every scale of being. And it implies that the you said this, and this is probably a good way to wrap up, is that you asked at the start of this, what should be what's the point of what's the universe's point, like what is the why are we doing anything, and uh, why is the universe doing anything, why did God create, and my work seems to suggest that God, or the initial singular sentience of existence itself that was alone, uh, is creating additional sentient beings to maximize meaning. Because if sentience is all there is, then it's the only thing that you can fundamentally impact, and that meaning would be impacting on your impact on another. And if there are no others to impact, then you are meaningless. So basically, it ironically kind of implies that God is the only being that has ever existed that was ever meaningless and was ever alone, and that's why it was meaningless. There was no one to impact, and then because of this, chose to create additional sentiences in order to create meaning itself. And it's also interesting that just that my I remember the geometric unity paper opens up with a question by Einstein. I think that he had asked, which is, I wonder if God himself had any choice in the rules of the universe. And uh, there is choice, and choice is what creates sovereignty. The difference between you and me is you can choose something, make a choice, and it's not my choice, and I can make a choice that's different from your choice, and that makes me separate from you. Uh, but uh, that the constraints of creation appear to be so tight, because you have to start from oneness, that in order to create a meaningful universe, it seems like there is only one way to create it. The rules are the rules, and God had appears to have had no choice in the rules, according to my work. Otherwise, how would I even deduce any of this? But and that's I'm just saying this is how it appears. It might not be from his perspective how it is, but it does appear like it had to be a choice to create multiplicity, because oneness is the intrinsic nature of existence itself, because there's only one existence. And so to create multiple existences, which is really like, or multiple sentiences within existence, multiple experiences within existence, you have to go against your own nature of oneness, which is kind of what a choice seems to be. Is it's when you go against the programming because you're just aware of more. And but that it's what's interesting though about that first statement that I made there is in that poetic description um, is that it that even the question of what is the meaning of life, that question, how do you answer that when you don't even know how you're going to define life? So, but a better question might be, what is the meaning of multiplicity of creation of multiplicity? And uh, it appears to be meaning, like the meaning of creation of multiplicity is the maximization of meaning. And so I think that gives us kind of a framework for what meaning is, and how we can not just apply it in our own, that to guiding our own lives, but also see it in our own lives. We can see our own meaning. We are intrinsically meaningful. Otherwise, why would we be here? And we, even in our being here, gives meaning to another, which gives us meaning. So it's uh, it's just it's an interesting framework that kind of comes from a logical scientific approach of trying to frame reality. You get these moral revelations, I guess, that we all do have meaning. The creation of an additional sentient being does appear to have to be a choice every single time it's done. Not just It's not just a process of um, you know an automated process. It does follow specific rules that even it appears God has to follow, but or at least the structure has to be there. But every single time that the oneness of information coherence is is uh, segmented, or what do you do to a hard drive when you
Partition.
every time a sentience is partitioned, that is it must be a choice because it goes against the nature of being, and that means that we are here for a reason, and that reason is to maximize meaning. So
So the meaning of meaning is meaning.
the meaning of multiplicity of sentience is meaning. It's interesting because at the other side of this, it means that if you're God and you never created anyone else, you are you are going to live an eternally alone and be meaningless eternally, which you wouldn't experience time. So it might, who knows what that experience is really like, but it doesn't, it's not a long time, but it's also not instantaneous. It's somewhere in between, which we can't even fathom. But you would be alone and you would be meaningless. Not just be lonely and feel meaningless, be alone and be meaningless. And but because there's already multiplicity, because we were created by a singular sentience, we have intrinsic meaning from the moment that we are created. But I think Eric Weinstein said that the meaning of life is like the attempt to ascribe meaning to meaning or something. And it was like I was just trying to do mental gymnastics in my head, and I never understood exactly. I understood that there was like a meta level that he was trying to get at, but I don't think that it was obviously clear. But
it sounds kind of like the hands trying to draw themselves or something,
yeah,
kind of like Escher a little bit there.
Exactly. But that's not, people say, how does a fire light itself? No, the real thing is that there is an eternal flame, and that, divides itself, but it doesn't start itself. But same thing with this is you have to change the question. It's not how what is the meaning of life, which if we define life as sentience as a singular sentient being, if you're alone and you're just God chilling by yourself and there's no one else that has ever been created, there is no meaning. It's an intrinsic inevitability of the reality of the oneness of existence, and if it contains information within itself, then it's self-referencing because it can't reference anything outside itself, because that's all there is. So sentience seems like just a logical inevitability, but it's that meaning comes from impacting on another sentience, which means that sentience has no meaning in and of itself if there's only one of them. So it's almost like the answer to the meaning of life, it depends on how you define life. If life means a single sentient being, there really doesn't seem to be any meaning to it if it's just isolated by itself. But if you're talking about life as a process of interaction between sentient beings, then the answer is to maximize meaning. That's done through many ways, but partially by maximizing the amount of beings to impact.
Ooh, well, that's something to consider there. It might make the mind wobble, and that's a quote from Kelly Bundy right there. But see, I always kind of heard that the answer to that was supposed to be 42, which I did notice at one point in one of your things, you had 42 there, but we're over 2 hours. So you're gonna have to tune into Tyler's channel to find out what's going on with 42 and the theory of everyone. But
there is something going on with it, but we don't have time for that today.
Exactly. You have to tune in next time. So Tyler, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all who are watching now and temporally in the future. And here's to humanity and figuring stuff out with some computers and stuff. And Professor Wolfram, lead us out.
Although this is going to be weird, and it's going to be about a different.
Title of the conference was something like "Ground Truth" or "Turtles All the Way Down," and so it seems as though there's one Ruliad. I don't think it rules them all, and it might be just hyper-rulial turtles all the way down.
Yes, it's on the back of an infinite number of hyper-rulial turtles.
Various people are commenting on the outrage of hacking the universe on a MacBook Air.